Welcome to Revenue Mavericks, the podcast where today's most iconic GTM leaders break down the mindset and the moves that defy the status quo. In each episode, operators share the playbooks they've used to change the game and deliver outsized growth. And now, here's the host of Revenue Mavericks, CEO and co-founder of Carrot, Justin Schreiber.
Welcome, everyone, to Revenue Mavericks. My name is Justin Schreiber. I'm the founder and CEO of Carrot. Very pleased to be joined today by Peter Mahoney, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at GoTo. And Peter brings a wealth of experience to the table. He and I were commenting before the recording. He is one of the original IBM guys. So he had the opportunity to cut his teeth at what we were commenting is an outstanding go-to-market organization, from sales to marketing. Over the course of his career, though, Peter has had a wealth of experience founding companies, driving companies forward, both on the sales and the marketing side, until the point where he landed at GoTo today. So first and foremost, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin. Great to be here. And I actually take a little bit of exception to the original IBM guys, because, of course, IBM was started a little over 100 years ago. So I wasn't there back then. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
Okay. Fair point. Fair point. I guess we date ourselves in terms of different eras of sales. I started off my career at Siebel, and I was mentioning that we love to poach people from IBM because they were so well trained and, as you mentioned, so underpaid. So the perfect environment for recruiting.
Yeah, I have to explain to my kids. I've got two of my three kids are in software sales, and I have to explain to them, they don't believe it, that I actually went through a year of training with IBM before you actually sell anything. And that's just the way it worked back then. And I think great companies like Siebel did similar things. They had pretty extensive training programs. But these days, it's sort of jump in, and if you're not productive within about 4 weeks, then you're behind.
You know, that's actually an interesting point, and one that I've wrestled with, because I remember when I was in business school, I always used to say I wouldn't really want to work for a company that hired me as a senior executive because I have no experience. Today, though, it seems like one of the things that's highly sought after is somebody that can dive in and figure things out. If you're talking to someone that's just out of school, do you go for a great company that's going to train you and maybe give you a more junior role, or one that's going to throw you into a position with lots of responsibility?
So what I recommend, and it's funny because I've gone through this recently. I've got my two kids who are in sales. My son is 29, almost 30, so that makes me really old now. And then my youngest daughter is also in sales, and she's a little younger. She's 25. So I went through recently making these recommendations, and what I told them is that growth is really good. So when you're in an environment that's growing, you have an opportunity to grow with the company. And if you can work hard, improve yourself, you'll get an opportunity to do more and more things and get a broad experience. And so I recommended that. Now, for my daughter, who started post-pandemic, I said the most important thing for you to do is find a job where you can actually work in the office, because I think it's incredibly important if you're starting your career and you have the option to work in an office setting, because I think you learn a ton just from being there. And they both are working in kind of growth stage companies, and not giant companies, but companies that have enough resources so that they can put the right kind of training and enablement and have the right tools for people, and at the same time have an opportunity to grow. And I think that combination is a winner for people early in their career.
So growth is good is kind of the kinder, gentler revision to Gordon Gekko's great comments about greed being good.
Yeah, that's right. Growth is better.
Growth is better. Growth is always better. Yes.
I think being generous at some level in your career is really important, and being a little bit you don't want to be completely selfish. You also don't want to be completely selfless. There's a balance, but that's another philosophical discussion for another day.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into it then. I would love to hear about an experience from your past that predates your professional experience, but that has shaped you as the professional that you show up as today.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, Justin, and the biggest impact in my life that shaped who I am on a lot of levels is it didn't predate my professional career. It happened relatively early in my professional career. But my middle daughter has some pretty profound special needs. And she was born, it was 1998. And it was one of those moments where your life completely changes, right? Your expectation for how it's going to be, how your kids are going to be, how your life is going to be, just fundamentally changed. And it taught me a few things. And probably the biggest thing that's really helped me in my career is this idea that your work and your career, it's important, but at the end of the day, it's not that important. And unless you're literally curing cancer, which unfortunately I've not had the opportunity to do, you have to kind of compartmentalize and put your work in a place. Now, that doesn't mean I don't work very hard. I work very hard. My wife will tell you that I'm not available a lot, and I travel a lot, and I work many, many hours. But it gives you a perspective on what's really important. And that's one thing. And I think the other thing that my daughter, Marianne, taught me is that hard things are possible, but they take time and they take persistence, and you need to have sort of a long-term vision to get there. So for her, one of the things that we're incredibly impressed with is she, at now 28 years old, she lives independently-ish in a house with 3 other women with some pretty significant disabilities, with a staff of about a dozen people helping to move along. And she set that as a goal for herself when she was relatively young. And we worked on it for about 10 years and got her there about 2 years ago now. So you can accomplish a lot when you set your mind to something, but it takes some persistence and some long-term planning to get there.
Yeah. We all come to this planet with different skills and capabilities, strengths and weaknesses. I think the common denominator, though, is the struggle and the effort. And regardless of what the output looks like, I think those leaders that have an appreciation of the input, the level of effort and energy that's invested, are able to connect with people in a very unique way and an inspiring way. And just hearing you tell that story about your daughter and the effort, the struggle that she's been through, that's inspirational.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's interesting, Justin, because one of the things that the perspective thing is really helpful for me. And you and I share a similar perspective in that we're both founders. And it's, although it's very different, obviously, from that specific experience, it's one of those things where it's a rare set of crazy people who actually choose to do something like this with their life, which is the most stressful thing in the world, is I don't have to tell you. And it's funny because I talk to people all the time at work in GoTo is about $1 billion private equity backed company, and it's complicated, and we're working very hard to get it to achieve the level of growth that it deserves after going through a lot of change. And people often say to me, "Oh my God, this is so stressful." And I say, No, it's not. If you just said you've got a different scale in your mind of what stress is. And they ask me all the time, "Why aren't you more stressed?" I'm like, I don't know. It's okay. And I've got this on one side, this personal kind of experience of, wow, that's what stressful is. And then a professional experience that says, oh my God, if you're worried about, are you going to raise that round, or are you going to make payroll, or are you going to disappoint your investors or something like that? No, that's actually a different level of stress. So compartmentalizing and putting that in perspective, I find to be super helpful.
I agree with you. The CEO role of a founder of a company, it takes a certain type for sure. What I love about this job, though, in all seriousness, is it keeps me humble. I realize there are so many variables outside of my control there are so many areas where I come up short and I have to face those every day. And I have so much dependence on other people, whether it's my board or connections that I've got or customers. And unlike in other jobs where I feel like I've been able to kind of insulate myself from some of the realities and maybe got a little bit of an inflated perspective on what I was capable of, this just exposes you to all of the raw realities of life. And it's hard, but at the same time, there's something about recognizing your vulnerability and how good the people are around you and how you can turn to people and find good people that really is for me reassuring.
Yep.
Well, listen, let's go ahead then and move on to the next question. And one of the things I'm always interested in is inflection points. You obviously have run an incredibly successful career, small companies, large companies, founder, CEO. Now you're the chief commercial officer at a $1 billion plus company. What was the inflection point in your life that landed you where you are today?
Well, it's interesting. I thought about this, and I don't think there's one point. I'll pick one just because it'll make you happy and fit within your little box, because that will fit your muscle.
I like my little boxes.
I can tell, but there's often not one thing. There are a collection of things that make us and make a career. And the reason I say that, by the way, is that, and having kids who are sort of early career right now is especially important to recognize that don't worry about that one decision. Don't worry about that one thing. You actually have time, and the world is changing so much right now that I believe that people have time to make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's super advantageous for people to try some things, to take some risk, and not fear making some mistakes, because some of those mistakes are going to turn out to be developmental for you. You're going to learn a lot. Other things that may feel like mistakes in the short term actually are really important building blocks for the long term. But speech aside, if I think about a moment for me, and maybe a decision point for me that was really meaningful, it was relatively early in my career. I was probably in my, late 20s or early 30s. I think I was in my late 20s. I was working for a company. I started out, strangely, I ended up working for IBM, as you mentioned. And I ended up in sales, which is the weirdest thing, because I have, I went to school for more technical stuff and have a degree in physics and computer science, and ended up in sales sort of accidentally, and ended up working for IBM for a while, and then went to another company. And I was working for this company. It was called PictureTel. It was early in the video conferencing time. And I had some really amazing opportunities there. And it's why I recommended to my kids to go to growth kind of companies, because I think it's an interesting thing. They were a fast-growing public company at the time. And I had this opportunity early in my career where a GM of one of the divisions of this company came to me and said, "Hey, I just fired our head of marketing, and are you willing to take the job? Because we need someone else." Like, literally, I'd never had a job in marketing before. I barely knew what it was, but he saw something in me, and he trusted me, and he gave me this job in marketing. And I said, of course, in my late 20s at this time, sure, I can do that. I can be the head of marketing for a division of a public company. Why not? Right. That type of thing. So that's how I started my marketing career. And then I quickly kind of grew up and then ended up running corporate marketing for this company. So I had sort of big teams of people working for me. And at one point I decided I needed to make a change, because I knew I wanted to be more broad in my experience in my career. So I purposefully took a job as an individual contributor. So I had a team of 30 people or something at the time. And I said, I actually want a job in product. So I took a job as basically a product manager, and they called it something fancier than that, but that's what it was. And I took a job as an individual contributor, as a product manager, and people thought I was insane. because at the time it was one of these things where it said, hey, you've got this big group of people and you seem like you're going on in this marketing direction. And I decided that, for me, what really interested in me and what I thought would be useful for my career is to be more grounded in other functions, in particular in product, because if you work in tech, I think you really have to have a grounding in product. So I did that, and it was great. And it was actually the reason why I had been able to take on several sort of general manager kind of roles. So I was a general manager of a bunch of different business lines and product lines in different companies, which is what trained me to be a CEO and gave me the confidence that I could start a company and did all that. So I think that moment, deciding to kind of go from running a big team to learn something different and new, and that was probably the big moment for me that was most developmental.
When you decided to go after that opportunity, were you thinking long-term, this is going to set me up? Or were you thinking just in the short term, hey, this sounds really interesting, good challenge, I'm gonna try it out?
It was the long-term thing. I actually very explicitly said, I want to do more. I want to be a CEO. I want to start my own thing. And I thought that experience was really critical. And I had some great mentors in my career who had said that it would be really valuable for you to have more product experience. And I agreed. And that's why I did it.
When I was younger, I had younger kids. My kids had this toy called a hex bug. Have you ever seen these things before? So the hex bugs are little tiny, they're about the size of a matchbook, and they've got a battery in them and they vibrate, and they got little rubber feet. They have no sense of direction. They just vibrate and bounce around, and you put them in a maze and they bounce off the walls. What's amazing is over a period of 20 to 40 minutes, they find their way through the maze because they just keep bouncing off of walls, redirect, and then move forward again. And so many times I think that's such a great metaphor for a career. To your point earlier, you've got to be willing to try things out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think, though, coupling that directionally with where you kind of know you want to go is the magic spot where, okay, 20 years, 30 years from now, I do want to be a CEO. So I'm kind of going in that direction, but I'm just going to try a lot of stuff and see what feels right. You blend the deliberateness with the what am I trying to say? the fortunate opportunities that you run into. Serendipity. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. It is a good metaphor. And speaking of metaphors, I'm famous for using metaphors that I know nothing about. And so I use sports metaphors, and I don't watch any sports on TV. I don't really know any of them, but I'm going to use the sailing metaphor because I think it's one that, and I also don't sail. I mean, I've sailed a couple of times, but I'm not a sailor. And I use this all the time because if you think about trying to do hard things and set broad goals, it's kind of like sailing. So you get in a sailboat and you say, I want to go to Bermuda. And the reality is that you're going to head off in the general direction of Bermuda, but things happen along the way, and you're going to adapt to what happens. And what do? You tack. So you make micro movements all the time, but then you also make broader adjustments to your plan based on the conditions that you happen to be operating in. And that's the kind of thing that I think is really important. The other metaphor is a GPS, right? So traffic happens, you get rerouted, et cetera. But you need to have the direction. You need to know, where's that idea I want to go to? In fact, the CEO of Francisco Partners, DJ Deb, DJ is the CEO of the private equity owner of GoTo. He famously says, what he tells executives all the time is head north by northwest. He said, doesn't matter if you're not perfect in your direction, but you should be generally in your direction. And then you can adjust along the way. And I think that's the same kind of thing. If you have a setting, if you know where you want to go, then that's where you want to head.
I love it. All right. Book recommendation. I read this book about 20 years ago. It's called First You Have to Row a Little Boat, Reflections on Life and Living by a guy named Richard Bode. And he was a guy that was a sailor. And he talks about his life. He started off, his dad gave him a rowboat. And basically, year after year, he graduated to larger boats to the point where he had these massive boats. And he made a similar point, with a rowboat or any of these other small watercraft, you can never go directly to the destination. And he also said, as you matriculate to these larger boats, you obviously become more skilled as a sailor, but there are new challenges that are introduced. So to some extent, you always feel like you're kind of in uncertain times, and you're using that idea of just head in the general vicinity and you'll make it.
Yep. Good advice.
All right. Last question is the secret sauce question. I'm interested in a framework, a process, an approach that you use in your job that you feel delivers outsized results.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm going to go back to my metaphor of picking a goal and sort of tacking along the way. One of the things that I tend to do, I'm very focused on goal alignment and focus, and I like to start by defining what my goals are and really almost overanalyzing what I'm trying to do to boil down the key initiatives that are important to drive success of my function or my business, and so that I deeply understand them. And then the process I use is, it's funny, I've been trying to do all this agentic automation of what I do, but at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter because the manual process, and whether I automate some of this or not, is the most valuable. And the process I go through is every week I have a reflection. In that reflection, which for me starts on a Sunday, I have about a 3-hour process every Sunday. I told you I work a lot. So every Sunday I go through this process where I prepare for my week. And part of what I do is I start with my goals and say, what am I trying to achieve? And then what I do is I literally map out what I've done, and I make myself write down what have I done to achieve each one of these goals this week. And even if it's nothing, I force myself to write nothing. Say I've done nothing this week on that thing. And then I track it every week. And I start to look at these trends and say, well, wait a minute. I've said that thing is important. In 6 weeks in a row, I've done nothing to move the ball forward. And that makes me either do one of two things. Either I'm going to say, maybe it wasn't that important of a goal, or it's going to animate some action for me to say that this is crazy. I'm not making enough progress. I need to figure out how to either delegate something differently, but I need to find some way to make it happen. And that discipline of focus, I find, is extremely valuable for me to move forward complex businesses that takes a lot of focus, because the reality is that we get so mired in the day-to-day distraction that we miss this setting. We miss the heading that we're focused on. We miss the we're trying to go to Bermuda thing. And unless you look at it methodically and regularly, then and really sort of take stock in how you're making progress. And I do the same thing with my personal life. I've got personal goals and I've got business goals. Then you're never going to get there. And that discipline is something that's been very effective for me throughout my career.
So it sounds like you've created a system where you're able to, number one, create or come up with these ideas, and then wrap around that the armature that you need to actually bring that to fruition, or maybe not. You're also able to iterate and determine whether or not what you thought was important continues to be important.
That's right. That's right. And a lot of it is systems thinking and just focusing for a long time to solve complex things. And it's funny, I actually wrote a book that addresses this at some level. It's behind me. It's called The Next CMO, A Guide to Operational Marketing Excellence. And during my company that made a platform for marketing people, we decided that it would be important to write down my ideas of how to do that. And that's been an important, it was a good way for me to try to write down some of these thoughts around how do you actually do that at scale.
So anyone that writes a book is clearly a structured thinker and tenacious. It is no small feat to pull that off.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I co-wrote it with my co-founders, and we wrote it end to end. It took us about 3 months, and it was an incredibly intense period that was super helpful for us. It aligned us on what we thought we really believed in for building this company. I think we're somewhere north of 70,000 copies in circulation right now, so it's been pretty successful. And it was a great experience. We've got two editions to the thing, so we did one time, and it was successful. So we decided to create a second edition. But yeah, it was a labor of love. It was a really valuable experience to do, and it was a lot of fun.
So many executives have these ideas or these concepts floating around in their head. What did the discipline of actually having to put that on paper do for you in terms of your philosophy and how you applied it?
Well, it's interesting. One thing it did is it refined it a great deal. And the process, especially agreeing with the team, and part of the value was I wrote it with my co-founders. And one of them is a marketing professor, and he was a 5-time CMO, and now he's a marketing professor. And the other was my CTO, who's now a CEO. So he's been pretty successful too. And the value was really working out among your colleagues what you really fundamentally believed in. And that editorial process, almost like an academic process, was super valuable because we debated the right approach to do things. It created a better refinement of what this was. We ended up building a better company and a better product as a result. And I think it made me a better marketer. And when that's what I did, and it was a great experience overall. So I've kicked around. I've actually reserved the domain, the next CRO. So I decided if I want to do that, I'll do that at some point, maybe. But I think there's nothing like doing it. It's one of those goals I had in my life too. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to start a company. There are a few others that hopefully I'll get to at some point.
So we're going to bring this full circle. We talked about IBM. I will quote one of the original IBM guys. We'll go back a little bit farther in time to Tom Watson, who is famous for his slogan, "Think, one word." I think he coined that actually at NCR when he was at NCR and then went over to IBM. His whole premise, though, was I don't pay executives to do the legwork. I pay them to think, so that when we do the legwork, we're moving in the right direction. And what I love about the system that you've designed is it has the room to think and understand before you take action. Let me ask you one final question, because this is something that's been on my mind. AI makes it so easy not to think. It makes it so easy to hand the thinking over to the AI. You explicitly said, I don't use AI in a lot of this process. How do you think about striking the balance between retaining that critical thought, but also capitalizing on all of the productivity that AI can deliver?
Yeah, I think about this topic a lot, Justin, because the world is changing so quickly. And I'm a huge automation nerd. I've always been into trying to figure out how to systemize and automate things. But what's most important in my mind is automating the stuff that can help you get to the point where you can focus on the essence of what you're trying to decide. And understanding where that line is really critical, because it's super valuable to get lots of data. And when I interact, I'm a big Claude co-work person right now. When I interact with Claude, as an example, I challenge it. I challenge it to challenge me all the time. And I get frustrated when it is providing me too much information in this broad and diffuse kind of way. But it's what's critical is getting to the point where you can frame up problems in a way where you can actually make a decision and have an insight. And what I like to do is not tell me the answer, but tell me the considerations. Give me the framework to think through something, but let me do the thinking. And I think that's really important is to not completely cede to the machine every decision, but leverage the machines to help you get a set of data so that you can make your own decision, interpret the data the way you want, maybe get some suggestions, but never fully cede that final decision point to the machine, because ultimately you're the one who's accountable. The machine isn't going to get fired, but you are if you make the wrong decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that notion, and I think it's a powerful one. Poke holes in this idea, but don't come up with the idea. That's my job.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, Peter, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for the words of wisdom, and congratulations to you on a great career.
Thanks, you too, Justin. Appreciate the conversation.
You've been listening to Revenue Mavericks, sponsored by Tarot. Tarot is the AI-native revenue operating system that Revenue Mavericks count on to increase forecasting precision and sales productivity. Follow Tarot on LinkedIn for new episode drops and updates. Thanks for listening.